Sir Joel, um,
Oh, just did.
greetings, one and all. Welcome to the Timeless Gamer Show, where our games in our bodies may grow out of date, but our gaming experiences will forever remain. Hey, timeless! And the show is now streaming live in Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And for all of our old videos, you can still check them out by going to the YouTube channel of the Timeless Gamer Show, or you can just go to our website, timelessgamers.com. Or you can just listen to us by going to all of the major streaming platforms out there by searching in Timeless Gamers Show. We would like to take this opportunity to give our timeless appreciation to BitMap Books and Streamyard for allowing us to be one of their official affiliates. And a quick shout out to our Retromancy cohorts, Studio.ph, Shuffle Emporium, and Retro Unlimited. And also a shout out to our retro gaming friends from the Sega Mega Masters podcast and the Retro Gamers and Collectors of the Philippines Facebook group. So previously on the Timeless Gamer Show, we shared a few of our favorite male video game characters, husband material, basically. So if you are curious on the ones that we have picked, you know what to
Nobody,
do.
nobody cares. I mean,
Yeah, and I promise to Sir Viraj, we kept it halal, okay?
Yeah.
For the most part, for the most
Yeah.
part, for the most
Raj
part.
is really just shaking his head right now. Just.
So
They're not
for
even
this
real.
very special episode, okay, so today's a very special episode, guys. It's been a while since we have done an interview episode. So before we introduce our special guest, let's introduce the panel. So Viraj,
Hi there, it's going to be an interesting show. I'm sure we'll learn a lot of informative things about, well, what goes into the start, middle, and end process of how a video game is made, and well, we'll see. We'll have Erik Walhberg here shortly, and we should have a lot of fun just learning about things. But yeah, I look forward to the show. Over back to you.
all right, thank you for that, Sir Viraj, and of course, Sir Joel.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. This is Joel Bacleed of the Manyang Native page, asking everybody to share this episode far and wide to all your groups, to all your friends, to all your family, because today is a very special day. We are going to be interviewing somebody extremely special to the industry, and who is turning out to be very special to us now too. But we'll save that until we get to the actual meat and potatoes of the show. Back to you, Joe.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Joel, and of course, Miss Hino joining us for tonight as well.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening to everyone out there in the world listening to our show for today. I'm really excited. This is a part of the gaming history that I'm not really that familiar with, but from a game development perspective, I believe that this will be a good learning experience, not just for me, but also to our viewers who would like to work in the game industry someday. Thank you. Back to you guys.
Thank you for that, Miss Hino. Very inspiring. Very inspiring. So let's get into it. So, introducing our special guest for today's episode. He was a former game tester, a game designer, and a game producer who worked under SEGA of America, Sega Soft, Electronic Arts, Namco Bandai, just to name a few. He was involved in producing video games such as Eternal Champions for Sega and Knockout Kings 2000 and 2001 for Electronic Arts. Rise Star, Lion King, Dark Wizard, Panzer Dragoon Zwei, and lots more. An avid reader of the comic books and visual novels, a seasoned player of Dungeons and Dragons, deemed as one of the legends within the Sega Facebook community, the one and only, from the state of California, Sir Erik Walhberg. Here it is.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Appreciate you. You know, I was going to open with some Tagalog, but I was afraid to really botch it. So
we'll
decide not to
say it because we Filipinos love hearing,
Yeah.
Tagalog, no matter how
No matter what.
yes, no matter how it's pronounced. Go ahead.
My opening was going to be, ano ba sinasabi mo sa akin?
Well done.
Good. That's
Nicely
good.
done. Excellent.
Good.
Well done. Okay. All right. Very
Thanks
good.
for having me, guys. I appreciate you very much.
Okay. All right, Joe.
So we'll go with the first question. So Sir Erik here graced us with his. So we're very privileged for having Sir Erik gracing us with his presence here in the Timeless Gamer Show. So he agreed to answer some of our questions. We submitted a few to him. Okay. To all of you guys who are watching and listening, who are watching us and listening to us live, just jot down on the chat your questions directly to Sir Erik as he answers along with our questions. So let's go with the first question, Sir Joel.
All right. I guess, well, the first question is because we here in the Timeless Gamer Shows always strive to entertain and educate at the same time. And of course, we always look at things on a holistic level. So my first question to Erik Walhberg is, who is Erik Walhberg? And as the late great Steve Jobs would ask, what dent have you made in the universe in the past, and what do you plan to do as a dent in the universe now and in the future? Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So I think the biggest description that I would give that gives me relevance in the community is I've been around in the industry since 1992, and I haven't stopped. I've been working, as was mentioned earlier, with that Joe was mentioning some of the companies. I've been all over, and I've worked in a variety of roles. And as you know, I'm still in it, working at Zynga at the moment, and worked on many different platforms, many different genres, worked with internal teams, external teams. I've done a lot. And so I think the relevancy is that I've touched a lot, I've seen a lot. And I think that probably gives me interesting stories to tell. And then what have I done? I think my biggest accomplishments that would be kind of facing your audience would be things like, as mentioned earlier, Eternal Champions for the Sega CD, which is I had my first design work on that, and I could speak to that later if you'd like. And then my first full lead design roles, which was Knockout Kings 2000, 2001, which I think did quite well, and then also people do think highly of it these days still. And then I worked on casual games and some MMOs that are no longer around and things like that. So they might not be as exciting, but I did continue to contribute and meet people. And one interesting bit is that, as I'd mentioned, I work at Zynga. There are people from about 6 different companies that I've worked at that are at Zynga. The VP of the division I'm in, I worked with him at Sega. His name's David Gray. And so there's so many different people you meet, and if you stick around long enough, you're all kind of the same pool of people after a while. And that's basically it.
I can imagine that being the case. People who game like meeting people who game, and people who work in games. Well, as we go forward, so that people don't get lost with our terminologies, could you define briefly some of the terms that we're going to be discussing here in the show? Like, what is a designer? What is a producer? What is a tester? Those things, so that we can put them all in context in our heads as we go with the conversation.
Sure. Yeah. So the testers are also nowadays called QA, and if you want to speak more in detail on that, so far as it pertains to Sega, they were different than they are now because of the fact that you would release a product and you couldn't really go back. You couldn't do an update, So, but anyway, that's what that is, and it's quality assurance. It's making sure that the game is primarily bug free, but then also give feedback for gameplay, difficulty, nuances, sometimes suggestions. A producer is someone who is kind of in charge of the game as a whole. They will shepherd the game from concept to release quite often. They interface with many different disciplines, from marketing, sales, QA, design, art, engineering. And sometimes they're creative producers, which I think I would call myself, which is where you're more involved in the design and the vision of it. And sometimes you are mostly just the project manager, and you just make sure that the game is meeting everyone's expectations. And then as designer, there's a variety of designer types, right? So I've been both a what you call a paper designer, where I would write something down and then share that document with the development team, who would then make that into a game. But then also a content designer, which is where I use in-house tools to create things like quests, missions, things that are almost like low-level engineering. That is a much longer than 2 sentences or 1 sentence each, but it's hard to describe it that quickly. But those are the three roles.
I know we very much appreciate it. We want a general overview of what we're going to be talking about, but as much detail as we can get, so that we don't get lost with the terminologies. All right, Joe, let's begin with the questions.
So I'm going to start off with mine. My personal question, actually. So let's turn back the clock all the way back to the 90s. Okay. So
how very Johnny hates jazz of you. Go ahead. Okay.
So let's start off with your years in Sega. So you started out as a tester at first. Okay. And we've always been told that I'm not. This is the word. This is the best word to describe it. The animosity between Nintendo of America and Sega of America was that made that it's the console wars at the time. Compared to what we have now, it's stale. Back then, it was different. So there's the mindset of those who are in the higher management and those who are below the ladder. So for you guys on the QA side, the developmental department, how real was it? Like, how real was the competition against Nintendo at the time?
Yeah, so I can speak on both, I think, the executive level and the kind of publisher and development level. So from the executive level, these are things that I both learned later and then also had seen by being in the room with certain people. It was 100% of business when it came to the executive side, which was just strategies and product and all those things, but never anything they would call animosity from the executive level. They just wanted to win, right? And so Sega positioned themselves as the cool guys, the cool system, and the cool games, and that did leak down to the guidance, kind of the type of games we were trying to make at Sega as well, right? And so the publisher side, because we want to compete with Nintendo, we want to make sure that our games were edgy, were cool, were fast, were more hip and exciting. And a game like Eternal Champions would never have been made on the SNES, right? So I think that's where the competition is, and plenty of our QA and producers and things played Nintendo games. So I mean, nobody hated them. I personally am much more of a Sega fan because I don't like cute as much. The game's got to be pretty amazing for me to enjoy it. But I think most everybody just liked good games. And, I heard that SNES and the later systems had some pretty good games.
A follow-up question with that, Sir Eric. So 95, 96, when the United States Congress started looking up at the over excess of violence and the adult content of video games coming from both Sega and Nintendo, the ESRB happened. So what was the gradual changes that you had to that you guys had to do back then? Because like you mentioned, it's quality assurance at the time. So if you guys were involved with quality assurance, then how come these games are having, as far as edgy is concerned, how come these games have been such described into scrutiny with some of the parents saying that they're too violent or there's having way too many risque things in there? So what was the gradual change when the ESRB happened?
Sure. Yeah, I was actually in QA at the time, and funny anecdote. So when Night Trap came out, it was really the start of a lot of the Sega CD games, because before that time, aside from something like Mortal Kombat, there wasn't really a whole lot of opportunity to have things that were excessively, violent or excessively realistic. We certainly, in most video games, aside from things like PC games, would avoid anything that was kind of sexual or innuendos because they kind of knew the audience needed to be kind of younger. We had something called Sega standards that were checked against in all of our games for kind of the bits that I've mentioned. Excessive, violence, sexuality, inappropriateness, and stuff like that. And so the reason that, to circle back, the reason that all came up was because a combination of a senator who wanted to make a name for himself and decided to point out something like Night Trap, which I'm sure most, if not all, you guys have probably seen or played it. It's quite tame, but the perception in public was it was not tame, that it was bad, it was violent, it was scary, and all these things. And so which is really funny that here I am, literally 30 years later, because it was 94, I was in QA. We had a overflow because so many QA people at that time, because it was just thriving at that time. And I was at a big room right outside the main hall. There's all the testers in one room, not all of it, but all the overflow. And they interviewed me on a local TV station talking about this. And so, yeah, I was quite aware of kind of that happening. And the ESRB, that really didn't do a whole lot because that was a whole separate rating system. We would always stick with our Sega standards, and then it was really easy. And in fact, more games if they're able to put an MA label on some games, or what I forget the PG-13 version, what they called that. But yeah, those things kind of sort themselves out. It's a lot like the comic book stuff way back in the 50s, which is they were probably unjustly and maybe justly persecuted, and say they had their comics code authority. So ESRB was kind of a separate entity from what we did, and but allowed for games like Control and Champion Sega CD to exist, because that is a super violent game, and we put a big MA label on it. And so then we could go willy-nilly, we can go crazy and do whatever we want, because we're warning everybody this is a mature game.
It's funny because it's funny that you made that comparison. I did read the 10-Cent Plague, the book about how the comics code came to be, and I read Console Wars by recently, the book.
Harris.
And there's definitely parallels there. But the fact is that you're saying that internally it didn't affect you so much directly as it was because of the fact that you guys were trying to stick to the standards that you guys have set for yourselves. Okay.
I remember reading a passage from Blake Harris's book, Console Wars, that when Congress was trying to suggest like a regulatory system for for video games, Sega said, like you mentioned, you got your own standards, and it was suggested that both companies should adhere to that, but Nintendo said no.
Oh, yeah, I completely missed that. So did they not join the SRB for a long time? Or what was that story there? Okay, and it makes sense because I mean they're like Disneyland, right? I mean, you can't find anything that's violent or offensive in those games, right? So that's interesting. I completely missed that. But then you know what? That makes Sega cooler because we had games that could be mature and other things, right? So
I think on the flip side on that coin is, I mean, if you look at the Sega Mega CD, it's definitely not a console for children. I mean, you have to be a working man to afford that thing to play that game on. So I don't think the MA or the age restriction would have affected the sales of that particular game. Obviously, we just discussed before we went live how it's sad that it was a late release for the Mega CD, and how we had the 32-bit systems that were coming out there that outshone all the 16-bit, even the superior 16-bit stuff on Mega CD. But yeah, I think that the Mega CD, for those of you listening, because obviously in the Philippines, Sega didn't really have a following as we know, and this is an informative show more for the people in the Philippines as to how Sega conducted themselves here in the West. And, to have a look at some of the games that they may have missed out on because it's more Nintendo centric in the Philippines. The Sega CD is a premium bit of hardware that was an add-on for the Genesis in America, and it's known as the Mega CD in Japan and Europe. And it basically doubled the clock speed of the Mega Drive, so there's a faster processor in there, and it had some enhancement processors in there that allowed scaling and full motion video to be played on CD with the Mega Drive hardware working in tandem together. So it was basically a souped-up Mega Drive, and those games on disc could basically give much better quality in terms of audio and scaling than Super Nintendo could ever fully utilize. Sadly, the Sega CD wasn't fully utilized all the time with all the games. There were games that were just pure FMV games like Night Trap, what we mentioned. And we had games with enhanced audio which were pushing the limits of 16-bit, like Eternal Champions. But I just want to fill that in for those of you listening. What's the Sega CD? Well,
what is that thing? Yeah. Thanks, Raj. That's excellent. I wanted to mention regarding that. I've multiple stories, but I'll just tell you a couple. So I was a tester for. There was a line also coming from Digital Pictures, I believe. They're the guys that did most of those games. It was the Make My Video. I think that was also them, and they would basically get these big music players of the 90s, and then they would have kind of a story around, oh, we need you to make a music video with their songs, maybe like 5 songs, and then you would in real time you would have these little edits that you would create and effects, and sometimes just other videos it would be played while the music playing, or sometimes it would be an effect over the actual artist in their own video. And I was working on one called Crisscross, Make My Video. Remember Crisscross? Jump. Anyway.
Yeah, the kids who would have their jeans on backwards and walk backwards.
That's the ones. That's the ones. So the funny story I have on that is that, if you guys don't know me yet, you'll know me soon, that I'm pretty open and honest about everything. Like, why not at this point? And so my buddy and I, we would go to the clubs the night before, and then we had to go to my Sega tester buddy. We would go at 7 a.m. to work, and I would be exhausted, obviously. And I would, the way the game plays is you would make the video and then would play it back, right? Because you just made a video. I would always close my eyes on the part where it's playing back, because that would be my little rests. And so that if there's ever any bugs and Crisscross on the playbacks, that would be on me, because
that was when you had your eyes closed. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's funny. Okay, I can imagine that. The process. You have to definitely grab moments of peace throughout whenever as you're going through it. So I can imagine that happening. This is very insightful, actually, in terms of the game development process as well. We are very interested in that aspect as much as we are in the games themselves, because I always keep saying somebody somebody worked hard on this game, no matter how good or bad it is, and I play it to honor that person who shed blood, sweat, and tears over it. But I digress. Continue, Joe.
Oh, we got a question here coming from Sir Raymond to Sir Eric. If you're given a chance to turn back time, will you still compete with Nintendo?
I'm not sure what that question means exactly. How would you interpret that question?
In terms like if you suddenly found yourself isekai, Japanese term, just tossed back in a different time period or a different world, in your body where you were when
Knowing what you know now.
Yes, when the console wars were happening, and you had the chance to influence events from back then.
Oh, okay. So yeah. So how? I mean, I think it's been pretty well documented as to kind of some of the mistakes Sega made along the way, but also I think a lot of the reasons they did it because certain things weren't ready, and the way the market was, et cetera, et cetera. The ways that if I could affect it at all with Sega is I would have said, you know what, we're going to lose money for the next 2 years, but let's just focus on the Saturn or the Dreamcast or something, and just have a full suite of awesome games from first and third party, and not do some things they did like Saturn. They released early with a few games. I don't know what happened with the relationship with Electronic Arts, where they decided not to support any Sega games for those sports games, which were absolutely huge for selling consoles for the Genesis. Yeah. And so I think being willing to bite the bullet in the kind of transition from 16 to 32-bit might have saved them. And as well as some of the subtle things like, hey, don't let the Japanese product compete with the American product. There's room for a Virtual Fighter and Eternal Champions 3, right? And so that'd be some of the bits. I don't know if that exactly answers that question, but there's some things that I would see. Now, that being said, I think that there's a monster called Sony and another one called Microsoft that may have just beat us down anyway because of just sheer money and opportunity to do things. But yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways Sega did their best, but they also certainly made their mistakes.
If I can interject a little bit, Joe, I wanted to insert this into the questionnaire because since Eric already mentioned Microsoft, I see in your professional profile that you were involved with Heat.net, the online service, SegaSoft also. How does it feel being a pioneer of the online gaming craze that we have right now, and seeing reflections of the hard work that you did back then and the fruits of your labor? That's what's happening all over the world right now with Game Pass, with Sony PlayStation Plus. Do you see that as like, I worked on that, I did that, and that's a direct fruit of my labor. I feel proud of what I did and how it's all resulting in it now. How does it feel for you?
Yeah, I would, the way I would probably answer that is more so looking at how things work in the industry and how you might interface with it. So a lot of the times it's timing. SegaSoft with Heat.net, they were just early. Like the world wasn't ready yet. And so there weren't, modems weren't, they're still as slow as 14.4 modems. A lot of people didn't have amazing machines. The kind of the knowledge wasn't necessarily there industry wide. And people were still playing a lot of, one person PC games or just LAN games and stuff. Right. The thing that I'm proud of that hasn't really carried over anywhere is when I was at SegaSoft, Mike Latham, who is my boss, who is an icon, you guys probably know his name. He was the one who created Eternal Champions and designed the first one and did 95% of the design for the second one. And he said, hey, for SegaSoft, do you want to design a fighting game for the internet? And one did not exist yet. And because of the reasons I mentioned. And so I got together with both the engineering team, Cyrox in the UK, and my assistant producer at the time, David Gray, who was very technical, kind of a technical producer, and we designed a Netfighter, and that game was playable. And I could talk about nuances if you want as to how it worked, why it worked. But Netfighter played well. I played regularly with somebody from the UK just to test it, and it's in the Guinness Book of World Records as the first internet fighting game.
Nice.
Yeah. But to go back, it's about timing. So I also worked at a company called Sorent, which was a mobile game company in the early 2000s, and it was too early. People were still doing JTV and WAP games, right? And not that everybody has these smartphones, every single person ever, and the games are obviously more robust now. So that became Glue. If you guys have heard of Glue, so Glue bought Sorent, and Glue did really, really well. They had a Kardashian game and stuff. And they made many, many millions. And so it's timing, right? So I think Heat.net was timing. When I worked at Sorent, it was timing. But then sometimes the timing is just right. I happened to walk into Sega when 16-bit was hot. Sega was hot. You know, it was more Wild West. I didn't have to come in with a degree because I was still going to college at the time. So much stuff is timing in the industry.
All right. Thanks for that. Joe, continue with your questions then.
All right. For some of the viewers and the listeners out here, we're trying to make sure that we will not repeat the same questions that Sir Erik already answered from his previous interview. So we're trying to make it fresh. We got Miss Hino here. I think she has a question or two.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions, and I do apologize that I'm not as familiar with the Sega system. As mentioned earlier by Viraj, Joe, and Joel, the Philippines was more exposed to like the family computer, and then later on, Sony with the PlayStation. So we didn't really touch upon Sega. So I wanna ask you more about the game development side. I used to work in the gaming industry, but it was only for like indie games, and it's more of I was an illustrator back then. So, what were the challenges back then when it comes to game development? Whether it be hardware, shipping out the games, advertisement, because you did mention before that people have smartphones right now, so the information they will know more about game releases and whatnot, and there are a lot of retail game stores all over the world right now. So back then, what were the internal and external challenges that you had?
I would say some of these still really apply, but I would say number one was the release dates that we had for games. You hear a lot of indie developers or developers have more power over when they release stuff, and they say, we will release the game when it's ready, right? You probably heard that term. And when you work in corporate and work in a place like Sega, where you have, Christmas and you have these other important dates to hit, as well as timing of marketing needed to be out a few months. So you really had to lock it down. And more than a few games, either that I was worked on or it was in QA, were released, quote, too early. There was features cut. There was bugs that were shipped. Although, again, with the 16-bit days and 32-bit days, you couldn't really do too much of that because, you'd have to rev the entire game if it was bad. But not have enough time to make it as good as it could be. You have to sign off on stuff and be like, good enough. And I think that in our case, and probably many other companies, the development team, the design arm, the kind of creative aspect, they're usually pretty strong and they knew how to make good games, but they didn't have always the time to make it. So that's probably number one. Number two would probably be something like getting things green lit. It wasn't excessively political at Sega, but because you also had Sega of Japan, you would either get support or not, depending on how well SEGA of America is doing. So, like we could talk about it later, but I worked on localizing a game, which came out ultimately as Blazing Heroes, Realms of Mystara, Riglord Saga, all the same game. And I was working on it and rewriting all the copy, which is a ton. And because Japan saw us as weak and not doing well, which is when we're doing that transition with Sega CD and stuff that Viraj is talking about, that they suddenly just cut me off and didn't give me support. And so the money that would flow into SEGA of America came from Japan. And so that was also the issue, was getting greenlit, and I would say the scheduling. Everything else, I mean, was probably just par for the course with design, with game development, with you already know, because indie development it's just a smaller version of what a publisher or a big company will do, and so you kind of know the process. As long as you have enough QA, you have enough talented people on it, you have marketing support, all those things to kind of make that, because marketing support matters, because then you get more money for the game too, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, but the number one thing, man, we did so many games that we had to sign off on. Could have been better. If we only had 2 more weeks, we only had 2 more months. So it was really about the timing.
To piggyback off what you've mentioned earlier, that due to time constraints, whether it's from the higher ups or like incoming holidays like Christmas season, right now the trend is about gaming patches. Recently, in the recent years, AAA companies are known to release games that are either half-baked or contains bugs that are basically game-breaking. And to our viewers, game-breaking means you can't play the game at all, or the game shuts down in the middle of your playthrough because of said bug. What do you think about that approach now? Because back then you did mention that when you ship out a game, you remove a lot of stuff, you fix what you can fix.
Yeah. So I mean that's huge, right? And I think that there's not one gamer out there that likes the fact that they release games that aren't finished and they just patch it. And the unfortunate thing is that because game industry is so big now, and like a lot of corporate entities of any kind, there's executives that say, well, if we release this game on this date, we'll sell this much, and we patch them then. The blowback won't be enough to really affect our sales adversely enough that we shouldn't do it, right? And so that goes to things like microtransactions and all that other, if I can use the word crap, that you see in a lot of games these days. Whereas the old system was like, release it, this is the game, we're not going to ask anything more of you, enjoy, right? So it's a totally different animal, right? And so nowadays, like I, as a gamer, I tend to wait when the game comes out. I look at reviews, and there's a lot of people that will give you really good breakdowns of, the number one thing probably being, is the game solid? Is the game frame rate issues or bugs, or is it complete or not? And I've played games now I forget the name now. What is the cyber? Help me out, guys.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk.
Cyberpunk 2077.
Thank you. So Cyberpunk, I waited an entire year before I bought it, because that's when it's good now. It patches, cool. So sometimes I just wait, but I don't like it, to answer your question.
Yeah, Eric and I are of the same mind. I always wait about a year, and then you get the Game of the Year edition, all bugs patched out, all the DLCs available, all in one package.
No, I'm with you guys. I wait for 5 years. I just play retro. I normally just play retro.
I mean, but this is retro gaming community, so it makes sense that you play retro. But I mean, in fairness, there's so many great games just 5 years behind us. We haven't touched just so much more greatness behind us than I can see ahead and what's with us right now. And I mean, sometimes being that innovatory band customer, buying things on release, you're an absolute mug. You pay a premium for the console, a premium for the game, and it's not even finished yet properly. You have to wait for the DLC, and you have to wait for all the bugs to get patched. My friend Mia paid a fortune for Project CD Red's Cyberpunk 2077, and she was trying to downplay it, like, no, it's not broken, Viraj, don't make fun of me, but I'm like, you paid a premium for this, what is this? And he goes, no, but I still love it anyway. Look, I've got this lovely special box. So she paid for a nice packaging. It's a special edition, but she's got to wait for the game to be fixed again. I think that's a travesty. And I think, I think we're at a point now in modern gaming. I think the great thing about when you were making games, Erik, is yes, you were constrained for deadlines. You had to make sure that the game had a certain level of quality control. You put a lot of hours in the testing workshop. I remember you telling me how many hours you had to work testing these games. For good or for worse, the game came out and that was it. That was it. Bugs or no bugs, it was there. In terms of, to answer the question, Machine, in regards to broken games, I think there was a level of quality control that the game wasn't broken to the point where it couldn't be beaten. You can still play through it. But there are some games that I own on the Mega Drive. Fantasia, I'm looking at you, which are broken and very hard to control, but you can still beat the game. But it could have used more time to make it a bit better. I think if studios were more flexible, an extra 2 weeks to make one would be so much more worthwhile. But that was then. They had a deadline. They had to meet that deadline. Now it's a case of they're a bit more flexible, but with something, you've lost something there, which is you might just release a game and it just might be short of holes like Swiss cheese because they're flexible. I think with a definitive deadline, there is a level of pressure to make the game to have a certain level of quality before release. I think you win some on that side and you lose some there, and you win some on that side and you lose some there. So it's finding that perfect balance, and that's very difficult. Very difficult, isn't it, Erik?
Yeah, and yeah, 100%. And so I have two things to say about that. So one is, the complexity of making some of these bigger games like a Cyberpunk is that it's really easy to fall behind for a variety of reasons. And you might get executives wanting a big shift. Some EA games famously in the last 10 years have done a lot of that. That's really caused a lot of problems for the development. And then at the same time, you have smaller companies that everything rides on that game. And so even though it's, I guess, unscrupulous or at least poor form, they'll release it because they need some money because they're going to be out of business. And so it's a weird,
funding.
Yeah, it's a weird kind of combination of things. But yeah, to go back to what Raj said, 100%. And I think as gamers nowadays, and again, I'm still a gamer too, right? In that I keep an eye on the development houses that I know are really good. So when Baldur's Gate came out, Baldur's Gate 3, I bought it. I was watching the countdown to download it because I trusted them, and it was a great game and all those things. And so I think that's where you have to pick and choose. If you can count on certain development teams or publishers, you can buy it the first day. But other ones, if you're not sure, you want to wait for the reviews and then maybe do like some of you guys do, which is wait. So.
I remember that earlier, back when Joe was the one asking the questions. You did mention that, as the developers of a game, you had to commit to the things that you put out. And I do agree with you guys that the grunts, the developers, the coders, the artist, 2D, 3D, etc., the one who does the backgrounds, the music side, they have no control on what the executives would be, making a decision on. I mean, one day everything's going on, you're following the pipeline, and then suddenly executives upstairs would say, hey, there's this new trending kind of game right now. How about we change the aesthetics or the look of our game to adapt to that? And then on release, it's the developers who would ultimately get the flack from the gamers for releasing a bad product or a product that the gamers would think that is. Gamers can feel if it's a cash grab, if a game is a cash grab, and if it's not something that's particularly in their alley, if it looks like the development team is just riding the trends, but they're not really good at said genre, it's kind of sad because you did mention earlier, the developers sweat, blood, and tears, the deadlines, everything. It's not just playing games. Basically, we're making entertainment media, forms of art, forms of entertainment. So I really feel bad to two notorious cases where, of course, Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky, but those two came out came out at the top fully redeemed themselves, and now they gained the community's trust again. So I guess to agree with what you said earlier regarding patches, fixes, and whatnot, thanks to current technology, yeah, it can be a big boon if the developers would really commit to what they promise, like finishing a product. Um, what do you think about the current nostalgia trend? The remasters, the remakes of older titles, the revival of classics um, that the current young generation of gamers are not familiar with. What do you think about that versus creating new IPs, new ideas, new projects, new games?
So far as the interest and trend for retro, it makes sense in that you think of the age group of people when a lot of these systems first came out. And like Viraj, how old were you when you played the Genesis?
I was 5-6 years old around that time. 1991 was when Sonic the Hedgehog came out, and that's when I was 5 years old, but it was 91. So 6 years old. Let's say 6 years old, because that's what got me into video games, Sonic the Hedgehog. That's my generation. That's me.
Yeah, and so for people like Viraj, there's so many who are now of an age where they're kind of wanting to rekindle a lot of their childhood, and they have a little bit of disposable income, so they're interested in reaching out and buying and playing those games. And there's also something to it for people that are younger, like some of you guys that aren't all the age to be playing the Genesis games when they came out. You hear about them, you see them, you go, oh wow, these are cool. I see why they're cool. And so it's wonderful because, as you guys know, there's a lot of people making games for the Genesis even right now, and that's a different style of game, it's a different experience, and to have that exist in the same place where you have these crazy microtransaction games that don't need to have microtransactions in them, games that are, as you've been talking about the last 20 minutes about patching stuff. I think it's great. And I mean, I've played Streets of Rage 4 from top to bottom, all the characters, unlocked everything. And I love that stuff. And if the timing was ever right, I would love to work on some too. But I have a real life and I have kids, and I like, well, what's local? What's something I can kind of for regular, income? What's work-life balance? There's a little bit of that stuff, but I would love to work on, either a kind of a spiritual successor to Eternal Champions, or just anything with other like-minded people. And maybe I will someday, because I plan on doing this until they kick me out.
I mean, heck, you're right. People do still create games for the original Sega Genesis. We're even friends with one of the companies, Mega Cat Studios. If you guys are interested, you can check them out. But yes, continue. Miss Hino, do you still have a few questions, or shall we move?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
just a few more questions. Since you mentioned the work-life balance, what are the best practices that you guys did in the past that you think should still be used or utilized today?
Actually, it's probably the question, if you knew more and you're about to, you would ask, what would you do better? Because there was not much process. It was a lot of just working and working and working and working. Where's the deadline? Work harder, deadline's coming closer, work even harder. You're sick, well, keep working. And so there were certainly processes in place that had some semblance of like how many hours you would QA something, or calling something an alpha or a beta, what those criteria are. But there was a lot of people working a lot of hours, and in retrospect, I'm honored to have done things like that for something like Eternal Champions, where we worked on site for 1 year on the second game and a lot in the first game, and that's all we did every day. I got a lot of overtime pay because I was a tester back then, but yeah. So nowadays, because of things like, you guys know about the I think it's called the EA Spouse back in the early 2000s. So long story short, because I know it's a 1.5 or 2 hour show, is that there was a wife of a developer at EA back in the early 2000s that did a public complaint about how her husband was just completely emotionally and physically destroyed by working on this game for X amount of hours and years to get it out, and that there was lawsuits and things, and so a big shift. So there's a lot less of that work until you die. It's a lot more like let's make realistic schedules. Let's hire people if we need them. It does limit the success because the profit margins need to be higher. But yeah. So super long answer to your question. But basically, the things that So here's what I would say to answer your question about, because we're talking about how retro is cool too, is that the QA, like there's nothing like Sega QA. I've worked with a lot of people and a lot of good QA over the years, but the fact that they had a lot of high expectations of the QA, that a lot of really good organization, probably more so even than the development teams, and that they were so important to the finished product. They don't do that anymore. And so that's what I would say to answer your question. We could do better is the QA side. I would work on these massive games that are like 4 testers. I'm like, I can't believe this. And they would just
4 testers.
They would just glide over. They would glide over like 4 chapters of a very robust game and be like, okay, I found these 2 things. And then of course, when you release it, you get the public feedback, and there's like 27 things, right, or more. So is QA. A lot of mistakes made back then because they expected you to work to the bone. But the things that they did right back then was the QA. The QA was solid.
Very good.
That's interesting. And it's sad to hear that quality control right now for video games aren't as put into a higher standard right now. It's like the current developers are using the players as the QA testers.
Yeah.
But we do know that there's a difference between someone who's just playing a game versus someone who knows how to trigger bugs, or someone who knows how to find errors or spot bugs that can impact the game. I do have a last question for you. What misconceptions in gaming would you like to clear up, and what would you say to aspiring individuals who would like to work in the gaming industry?
Okay, yes, that's 2 parts. So something that misconception. So I think the biggest one would be that it's very interesting because it depends on the type of game, the genre, and the platform. When I worked on casual games at EA the second time I was there for about 10 years, and the players were warm and friendly, and if they had a question or an issue, they would tell it. It was very, very controlled, very positive. But then I've also worked at MMOs where they're extremely toxic and abrasive and and so you can't avoid toxicity in a lot of entertainment these days, but the people that would infer that developers don't care, or developers are doing things to spite the players, there's a lot of things we have to do in the background to try and make a game good, and it might be prioritization of things, resources, a lot of times resources, especially in a live game like an MMO. And so the misconception would be that the developers don't care. Most of them do, and a lot of them work pretty hard to try and do their best. And so that's probably the biggest misconception. And if they want to blame anybody, blame the executives at the top that make those decisions. But also they have to run businesses, so it's complicated. And then for people that want to get in the industry, I say this for anything in life is if they really want it, obviously do your homework to find out how to get in. Maybe you take schooling in game design or in coding or whatever that is, and then don't give up. That's the number one thing. Try and make contacts, move forward, work, get doors shut in your face, go to another door. Like, just don't give up. That's helped me in life. I have my own kickboxing fitness studio, but I probably would get knocked out if I fought in a kickboxing match. I'm not the most creative person in the world. I think I'm decent, but I'm not the best. But because of diligence, I still make video games, right? And so never giving up is the number one thing, and almost anybody can succeed that way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very good.
All right.
I mean,
bef-
touch on the second question that you asked, Miss Fina, or was it the first of the three that you asked in regards to video games and resurgence in remakes of classic games?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just something I've done. It's just be touching on the point, and I've made money on it, which is what was the most interesting thing. Is so Sega. If you remember, there was a press conference last year where Sega were bringing back some of their own franchises, like Crazy Taxis, and new Crazy Taxi, Jet Set Radio is coming out. There's the Streets of Rage and Golden Axe game coming out, a 3D version of each. Now, I thought, okay, well, what can I do different? Because I'm currently doing some Nintendo, I'm doing some Sega Game Gear. Let's do some Dreamcast games. And two of the games that I picked was Crazy Taxi, and the other was Jet Set Radio. And at the last gaming market I went to in Brighton, I didn't do well there, but I actually did sell Jet Set Radio because of that reason. The kid came out and goes, oh, they've announced this. Oh, what is this? And then, oh, yeah, this is the original. And I told him, and he bought it. So sometimes for retro resellers like myself, I get really excited and pumped when they remake an original or they continue that franchise with a sequel. Because people might be like, oh, I want to see the original again. And the same with Metroid Prime 4, when that comes out, all people are going to go for the Metroid games. When Zelda, that Netflix TV show comes out, or a movie they're making, that will come out, my Zelda stock will increase. So I get really excited whenever something like that happens. So, yeah, I mean, if there's an Eternal Champions remake or something that people are holding on to original, they'll get very excited because they might want to sell them for even more money than they are now. So,
well, it sounds like you're going to be really excited over the Yakuza Amazon Prime series that are going to be coming. So yeah,
it's from a commercial business point of view. I like it. Obviously, Mr. Wahlberg is an artist, and I'm the businessman. So obviously, from that perspective, who's selling this stuff, I get excited when
nostalgia sells.
Yeah, from a sales point of view, from that aspect, if they're going to continue a game or remake an original, people do seek out the originals to see what that remake is all about. It's in the news and they're thinking, what's this? What's that? There was a Mario RPG for Super Nintendo. What is this? Because it never came out in the UK, for example, and people want to play the originals again. If you have it in physical, they'll pay a king's ransom for it, so there you go. But anyway, sorry, I just wanted to touch on that point from another perspective anyway.
Well, and I want to piggyback on that because I think that everybody wins, right? Because there are some amazing games, even just the whole genre, if they haven't, played a 16-bit game before, that their eyes open up to like, wow, here's a type of game, or here's another way. Especially if you think of like a Streets of Rage 4, right? Because that's the one you can easily see like it's like a souped-up Streets of Rage 2, right? It's just the same thing. So if you play the older games, like, oh, this is fun, this is cool. I like the music. I like these characters a little different, the moves a little different, right? And so everybody wins, and I think that's really cool. And by the way, I found out that so you mentioned Sega CD Eternal Champions is worth a lot. I found out because if I sign it, it's worth half as much.
Oh,
but, anyway, that's it. Go ahead.
Oh, bless you.
Okay. Joe, you go ahead with what we've got.
So just to piggyback about Ms. Hino's question earlier regarding QA in the game testing, we have a question here coming from Sir Jomar. Sir Eric, what's the most bizarre bug you have ever encountered while testing a video game?
So I can only speak to one that wasn't really a bug, but I think it's a good story. Because to answer that first question, nothing comes to mind that was like crazy. I guess I can tell you one anecdotally that I didn't actually test. So I'll tell you that one first. So back in the around 2000 or so, I don't even remember what sports game it was. I think it might have been Tiger Woods Golf for like the PlayStation or something. And the developer, for some reason, had put in the pilot for South Park within it. And it's basically the pilot, so to speak, is super foul mouthed, super offensive. It's Jesus versus Santa Claus in a fighting game to the death. And that I'm not sure.
I am familiar with the pilot. Yes.
Okay, so I
That's
don't
the
know
one.
I don't know what the developer, when they put it in, I think they might have done it so everyone could like, oh, if you want to watch it, I put it on it, or to be a smart ass. But for whatever reason, it didn't get taken out. And so it was launched, and they would go, it had to be the PC version. You'd find the file. So that was the weirdest bug that I wasn't a part of, but I mean, that was a big deal. They had to like rev the builds and all that.
So you didn't even question it? Why is this here?
Yeah, I don't think that, I'm sure that somebody got fired, but I don't know why it was put in there. And then, so here's the bug that wasn't a bug. And I believe this was for both the Genesis as well as Sega CD, but it might have only been the Sega CD. I was pretty early on testing, and as a QA person, you're always just trying to find ways to break the game and trying to be really creative with it. Like, I'm going to hit all these buttons just as this transition happens, or I'm going to try this move that I haven't unlocked yet. Like you try and come up with weird things. And so one was I was playing and I pressed all the buttons at once, including like the reset button. And it wasn't a reset button because this was the regular controller. It didn't have reset. It was on the actual console, right? And so I pressed it all, and the game reset. And I was like so proud of myself. And I went over. I said, "Hey, I found when I press all these buttons, it resets the game." And they said, "Yeah, that's a feature of the hardware." Like, I didn't know this. I was so proud of myself that it was a bug, but it was just something that hadn't been documented that I knew of. And it's like, no, dude, that's a feature of our console. Welcome to Sega. So that was the only one that was funny.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I think it's Sega CD. I think it might also be the Genesis. Whoever has one at home, check it out. But it might only be the Sega CD, which would make sense in a way because there's a lot more going on with the rebooting of the CDs and things. But yeah, was it?
I should try that.
There you go. Okay, so we have the answer. Raj knows it was just the Sega CD.
But I think it was only with the Model 1 Sega CD, not the Model 2. So, I'm not sad enough to buy a Model 2 Sega CD to try it, but I know that I think the Model 1 was I'm guessing that. I can't remember if that was true or not. But anyway, I discovered a bug on a game once, and this is a common known thing with developers put it in. So it's a game called Sonic 3D Flicky's Island. It was called Sonic 3D Blast on the Mega Drive, right? Also on the Genesis version. And if you wiggle the cartridge in the slot, you unlock the level select of the game. That's just the way it was designed. That's really good.
Wow.
Game, but it just unlocks the level select on Sonic 3D Blast. So that was something I thought was like, oh, cool. Only my copy does that. But then I found out years later it was designed in that manner. What do you know, eh?
Interesting. Yeah. I've never heard of that. That's pretty cool.
So there you go. You learn something new every day.
There we go. Now you have one, Joe. You have.
All right. So we already reached the first hour of the show. We'll now proceed with some questions that were submitted by Sir Dan of the Sega Mega Masters, one of the co-panelists, Sir Viraj's show. So let's go to Sir Dan right away.
Greetings, Timeless Gamer crew. Our good friend, Mr. Erik Walhberg, is back with us today. I'm pretty gutted I can't make the show because I think Eric's a really funny chap. We have a lot of laughs on Facebook. His puns are terrible. His Dungeons and Dad Jokes channel, which I highly suggest you check out, is very funny and full of cringy bad jokes. So definitely, if you like that kind of humour, get it tucked in. So yeah, I'm good. I can't chat to you direct today, unfortunately, Eric, but I do have a few questions for you. So my first one's going to be about Mysteria, or Mysteria, however you pronounce it, the Realms of Lore. Now, this is just a game that, it's a very niche, tucked away game. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's essentially a kind of like a Shining Force strategy RPG, but it incorporates some like group tactic elements that are quite really interesting and kind of put it on another level to like your Shining Force and Fire Emblem games in another way. Eric was obviously involved with this, so I would like to hear from Erik. What kind of involvement he had. I believe he was the producer on it. I stand if I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected. But I just wondered like how much involvement he had with it and what his experiences were with that game. Really. So that's my first question.
Miss Daria from the Sega Saturn.
Yeah, so I have a lot of stories about that. First, it was great to see Dan. He's an awesome dude. So where do I start? Because there's a lot of stories with this one, and it's kind of cool. It's at the same time is kind of sad. So it was a fantastic game. So anybody who doesn't have it, if you like games like Shining Force, tactical turn-based games with a lot of evolving, leveling up, interesting characters and storylines and things, I think it does a pretty good job with that, as long as you're okay with the art quality of the time. But the stories I have, first off, we'll start with the name. So it was given to me as a localization project, and so the title was called Riglord Saga, and in retrospect we could have just called it Riglord Saga and that would have been fine, but I wanted to have something a little more kind of appropriate for the US market, and I'll say the UK market. And so something like the Mystaria Realms of Lore sounds a lot more like dramatic than just Riglord Saga. But how we got is we were looking for names, and so we asked a bunch of QA and some of the other people in development, and threw the names in the hat. And the one that I chose was Mystaria, and then I added the subtitle Realms of Lore. And I found out after releasing it, which is really funny because I should know, having played Dungeons & Dragons since I was 10, that there is a setting in Dungeons & Dragons called Mystaria. Sorry, the other way around. Mystara. It's called Mystara. And our game was notoriously close to that. And it's also a fantasy-based game. So TSR, who owned it at the time, sued / cease and desist for Sega. And I remember being called into the meeting with the lawyers, really nice room. I was like, oh, this looks important. And they say, who gave the name? Where is the name from? Because they wanted to try and find a culprit. And I didn't know. And I wouldn't be surprised, though, if it was one of my names that I threw in there and didn't realize it was like a subconscious Mystara thing. So then it became Blazing Heroes. So that game is been released as 3 in Japan, Riglord Saga, initially as Mystaria Realms of Lore, and then Blazing Heroes was what we finally came up with. So there's that. And then the other part, this speaks to there's a conversation about SEGA of Japan, SEGA of America. So when I first started, SEGA of America was doing better than SEGA of Japan. And so they were kissing up, they were funding us, they were giving us support. We got to do a lot of cool things. And then around the time that I got it, it was right in the middle of it, where things are still kind of okay. And I saw the raw translation of the story, and I was like, this is really nonsensical. And so I told my boss, Mike Latham, hey, I could rewrite this stuff. If you give me the time, I can rewrite this. And I won't go crazy off the rails, but I'll try and make it a little more palatable and make it a little more appropriate. And she said, cool, do that. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And I would send these things off to Japan and say, hey, we want this text instead. And it's a lot of effort because it was a lot for me to write. It's a lot for them to replace. About 3/4 of the way through was when things were really going poorly with SEGA of America and Japan, because again, we weren't doing well, like the reports of the sales for like Saturn, numbers and all these things. And whoever it was, powers that be over there, said, we're not translating any more of your stuff. We're using what was the original translation. And so I'm like, we have 2 different stories now. You have 3/4 of my story and 1/4 of what.
Oh,
Oops. We have
There we go. Awesome. I'm back.
All right.
we've got. Can you start where you said 1/4 of your
Yeah,
story?
cool.
So
All right, cool.
your story, and 1/4 of yours.
So anyway, I did what I could to try and get them to finish it, but I didn't have the power. Mike was busy, and Mike also didn't want to fight that fight, and so we just shipped it. And I said, people are going to notice, and it's online. They can even share with you guys later if you want. There's one that came out in, I think it was around 98 or 99, that somebody had reviewed it, and it's on there. That they say specifically, it's a cool game, this, that, but then all of a sudden the story gets really weird and off the rails at the end. It's because, that's because you're getting two different writers and completely different, kind of context. So that was kind of the interesting bit, but there's a lot with that. But I will go back. If you just play it for the fun of it, I think it's a really cool game. There's a really cool characters and creatures and things in there. And they did a great job with the music as well.
So basically, in Justice League terms, SEGA of Japan made a game written Zack Snyder. You came in as Joss Whedon.
Or vice versa. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know who the good guys in that story, but it was definitely something like that. Or I guess. I wouldn't use the Justice League analogy in that, like how that came out. It's probably depends on the person you ask, but that essentially the vision that I had for it was never committed. It was almost like you just didn't finish it. That's kind of the best way I would describe it. Like you just like
unfinished game story wise, and it affected how the game was, because it's a video game. I think everyone here will agree should be a truly immersive experience. And when the story is discombobulated and towards the end it looks like a different game or something's happened, it messes things up, and it's very sad that the quality control of the title went out the window because Japan were being odd. That's a nice. I'll say this.
I watched the first cut of Justice League the movie, although I haven't played Mysteria. But let me say, by what the sounds of it, I think what Sir Eric did with Mysteria. It's a lot better compared to what we had in Justice League.
The Snyder Cut. Well, the Snyder Cut is the way to watch it now. I think we all know that. I've got it on Blu-ray, 4K Blu-ray, because I like the Snyder Cut that much. But
what the 4-hour one? The Snyder Cut. That's bullshit.
Oh my!
You want me to go get my box set just to show you, just to rub it in your face? I've got something.
All right. Okay. So in this segment, we're gonna channel Miss Eileen here. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly. Yeah. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Ain't nobody got time to watch all the 4 hours.
I get the extended cut. You don't watch the theatrical release. Always the extended cut.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
I'm with Viraj. I like the 4-hour one.
But then again, there are certain things that you watch, extended edition, Lord of the Rings,
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, you watch Back to the Future back to back 1, 2, and 3, as one large movie. I don't know. I guess it all depends on where you're coming from in terms of the Justice League. If you've seen the Joss Whedon version, if you enjoyed that, you might find the 4-hour one unpalatable. If you're looking for more, then you watch the Zack Snyder version. You were about to say, Raj.
It's all about. Listen, Zack Snyder was the original director. That's his vision. Okay, there's a consistency to that film. Joss Whedon
no matter how asinine his vision was.
Okay, whatever.
Now we're entering comic book territory now, guys.
Smaller film. He obviously changed some bits in the film which were a bit off. So, for example, like you don't know this, but Joss Whedon locked up Gal Gadot in a room and said, "You're going to make this love scene, or you're going to do a love scene with Batman." And he was
ladies and gentlemen, we are at the part of the Timeless Gamer Show where we tweak Viraj until he gets frothing in the mouth. Okay.
Yeah. Like the bit where the Flash falls on top of Wonder Woman and made these awkward scenes and trying to put too much humor in it is ridiculous. It's meant to be a serious film. Zack Snyder Cut is the way to watch it. Watch the Zack Snyder one. The Joss Whedon one's an abomination, and you're all a disgrace if you're going to back that version. All right?
Oh, wow.
We need to reel in Viraj.
Yeah, and that flip out was brought by Erik Walhberg. There you go.
The overusage of slow-mo. Oh my God. Are those really necessary?
Movies, right? I understand the analogy. Obviously, the director has a vision, and it should be seen all the way through. And sadly, with this Mysteria game, Eric didn't get to do his full translation for the localization, and that's where it was discombobulated. I know. And it became an abomination like the Joss Whedon version of Justice League. I rest my case.
It reminds me of the Robotech and the macro situation with Harmony Gold.
That's true.
Eric, can you please tell us, since you mentioned you've worked for localization, and it's something that I wanna get into since I study Japanese, so I wanna help bring untranslated games to non-Japanese folk. So how does that go? And I do understand that you have this vision, but there's a separate vision on the Japanese side. I mean, how do you balance that out? How do you overcome that?
Well, I mean, it's probably different now than it was, in the late 90s, mid 90s. But, I think understanding who your audience is going to be and and also, keep in mind that Regular Saga was released as it was intended in Japan, in their own copy and their own name and everything. And so we're not necessarily bastardizing that. We're trying to make it more accommodating to ours. And I think that so when it comes to localization, there are localization producers and there are localization teams. And if for whatever reason, and I don't really remember now, but they handed, because it's a big project, probably they handed me a lot of the stuff that someone in the localization team might have looked at, but they said, hey, there's a lot of gameplay in here, so we need a lot of your input on, because there's a lot of abbreviations for things in the game that required a little bit of work, as well as even some iconography. But see, to answer your question, I think is if you're an artist working on it, you want to try and keep the integrity of what is intended, and then make the modifications that can fit between the technical constraints, the resource constraints, and then get the buy-off, get the feedback from marketing or from other peers that say, okay, yeah, it sounds like the right direction to modify it. I think localization nowadays is a lot more technical. I think you just kind of take it, you make it fit, you make sure that it makes sense. And there's probably so many tools and maybe even the AI at this point that helps on all that. But I would certainly say just investigate it, because I'm sure there's a lot of human being interaction that can make these localizations better.
You're absolutely right, Eric. I mean, I'll give you an example. This is one for you as well, Missinu. And this is something I worked on when I was making my Mega Drive mini build. And I looked at games and I looked at every single game and I studied them as to what happened when SEGA of America localized them. Two games in particular, Dynamite Heavy and Streets of Rage 3, stick out like a sore thumb. And this is going to be interesting. SEGA of America decided to make those games a little bit harder for the Western releases. And the reason being that back then people would rent out the video games for 3 days. And what they'd do is they'd make Streets of Rage 3 and Dynamite Heady just that much more harder. So you'd be more compelled to buy the video game rather than renting it. So
that's smart.
That's a downside of localization. On the flip side, they also took out the story, which was in Dynamite Heady. And what somebody has done on romhacking.net, sadly, that's going to come to an end soon. There's a patch for Dynamite Heady and Streets of Rage 3 for Bare Knuckle 3 that actually changes the story, because the story is totally changed. And it's so much better when the guy who actually translated the actual Japanese story on both of those is in there. And it's not just that. Even with Phantasy Star 2 and 3, the localization was done in English. And it's actually a lot better when actually a fan has actually translated the actual Japanese script. In fact, it makes the script 30% more than it was localized. So you actually get to see the full story. And that's not just with Sega games. That's also with Nintendo games or Square games like Secret of Mana and Chrono Trigger. There's actually a proper, localized version. Well, I shouldn't say localized, proper translated, fully translated patch out there for the ROM. We can actually experience the true story of those games that was actually meant to be in Japanese if you really care about the story of the game. So localization, on one hand, you can tweak with the game and make it a little bit more difficult and change the story completely to its original version. And even some of the sprites are different. So, for example, Axel in Streets of Rage 3 wears an orange wife beater or an orange shirt, whereas in the Japanese it's white. So there's little changes they've made. It's not unnecessary to be honest, but you play Bare Knuckle 3 if you're playing Streets of Rage 3, because that's the way that the original artist intended it to be. And you know this from history, and this is just only one story. When we talk about localization, because there's so many others, these are just ones that come at the top of my head. But if I really go back into the Genesis library, I'll think, oh, this is another one. This is another one. Those two always come up. And there's another one, Ristar, for example. Rystar, I should say. It has a different intro if you play the Japanese game, because there's a goddess that you see, but they've taken that little sequence out of the game on the Western release. They've changed it a bit, so you notice little difference between the Japanese and the English, and you're never going to get a true localization, but you'll get an interpretation and you know why they made it that way. It's because they wanted to make it for the Western market, and these are the quirks that they put for Western market, because certain things will not make sense for the Western market. Alex the Kid in Miracle on the Master System, he's eating a rice cake on the Japanese game. In the Western release, he's eating a sandwich. You see that little animation in Alex Kid on the Master System. So there's slight differences that make sense. Sometimes localization is a good thing, but you also lose something from the original game. So I just wanted to throw that out there from my knowledge of what Sega did in that era when looking at the localization.
Yeah.
Good reason.
I mean,
Good reason.
in one podcast, I was invited into a different podcast, and I was with other fan translators of Japanese games to English, and I got into a debate with someone who's a veteran of the fan translations community, and the topic was localization versus translation, molding the game to be more palatable to your target audience versus keeping the text as close as what the original creators wanted the story to be, or the setting to be. So one could say that it could be up to preference, the gamer's preferences, if they would prefer that something that's more close to home, or something that is more what they call this, what the original developers intended. And one thing I also noticed right now in the games is that, as you guys mentioned before, some games that came from Japan, when they're ported to the West, they change their titles. Right now, I don't see that as much. Other games even retain the Japanese titles, and I think that was an interesting thing to see. I don't know what caused that, but that is one of my observations in the recent years when it comes to localization / translation of Japanese games to the West.
Heck, you might even argue that they're reverting to the original titles, like Yakuza is going back to Like a Dragon, as a series. But that's I guess that's trending. It all depends, I mean, Eric can pitch in on this one. How do you feel about the way things are going in terms of that respect, like translations versus localizations? As a personal feeling, would you rather stick to as close to the original text as possible, or do you want it more consumer friendly, shall we say, general consumer?
So a couple things. I have something to respond to Viraj as well. He had a lot of great points, but specifically to that, I think that nowadays you would get skewered if you deviated from another, like if it was a Japanese creation, because the developers, rightfully so, are often revered and the work is appreciated, and also there's so much preview. And as well as the Japanese version is this already. You can't wait to see it here in the U.S. So it's different now. Back then, I don't know if they were right or not, but that the perception was all about the marketing part of it, right? Yeah. Which is because the name, the Mystaria Realms of Lore, which by the way went through our legal check. So but nonetheless, our marketing team was like, yeah, that's a cool name. We can market that, and so. Often that was kind of the reasoning. Now, this is kind of goes all the way back to an earlier question. I've learned a lot since I'd only been at Sega for 3.5 years or 4 years when I worked on that game, and now I know what I would have done. I'd say, hey, I want to talk to the guy that wrote the story in Japan. Can you please connect me with him? If he doesn't speak English, let's do a translator. And I want to understand, what is your story, because I want to try and make it as much of that as possible. Whereas back then, I felt like there was this wall and I couldn't. There's no opportunity. But nowadays, I just push and prod and find the right way to get in there. And then, if I did rewrite it, it would be much truer to what that person was trying to intend. I probably still would have got screwed, but at least it would have been more accurate to what he wanted. so I learned a lot, right, about doing that stuff. Hey, Antonio, good to see you. So also speaking about the difficulty of games, I think that 100% rentals was the reason, but another 100% was because we were trying to pose our games as games for like gamers. And so if you remember the terminology back then versus nowadays to say, did you finish the game is something you say, right? Did you finish Baldur's Gate? Did you finish Cyberpunk? Nowadays, back then you would say, did you beat it? Did you win? Because that was like it was an achievement of its own to like I finally finished so and so game, right? And so I think there's a combination of the way we're trying to, from a marketing and stylistic approach, make our games for gamers and harder, but then also making money because of rentals. So yeah, that's a lot of the answer and all those different questions I think I answered and some input.
As a side, though, Eric and I are going to have to get into talking about Dungeons and Dragons sometime in the future because, you know, the Mystara connection, Chronicles of Mystara is a big thing now, looking back at Dungeons and Dragons Tower of Doom and, you know, everything like that. But that aside, any other questions, guys?
I just want to sort of touch on the whole localization aspect. Just one more thing, a little bit of a tidbit of information that you think, what, really? Sega got involved on this game and they failed miserably, I think, because they tried to change the name of this game. And Falcom made this game called a little-known game called Popful Mail for Sega CD.
Right? Oh, pretty.
Yeah, so Popful Mail was developed by Falcom, who are famously known for the Ys action RPG series. And the Designs did an amazing English translation to that. That's actually when localization works, when you get a good company that can do a really good job. And when I played this game, I thought, oh my gosh, the character's actually talking. It's a 2D character, and you can hear the voice actress and all the characters. And one thing I noticed was when playing the Japanese ROM, she has more reach with her blade. Okay, whereas the English ROM, she doesn't have much reach. Like when she's going for someone, like it hasn't got. So it's a harder game as well. But that aside, this is what SEGA of America wanted to do. They wanted to rename and reskin this game and call it Sister Sonic. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to make it a Sonic game, but it would be like a spin-off game with Sonic, because they think, because on the marketing side, because it's got Sonic attached to it, and Sonic was hot back then, it might have sold more copies, and that's what they were trying to do. But obviously, Falcom fortunately said, no, this is our IP. No, go to hell. But that's not like, from the machinations of business. Would they have sold more copies if they called it Sister Sonic? And then that Popful Mail character became a part of the Sonic fandom. I can't help but think it probably would have, but it would have changed the game dramatically. It would have been something totally different, and it would have been an abomination if you actually looked at the original artist's vision. So that's just another one that I found really interesting reading about. How Popful Mail could have been drastically changed if Sega had their way with Falcom. But that's a fun game, by the way. So for those of you like side-scrolling adventure action RPGs in the same vein of Wonder Boy and the Dragon Trap and things like that, it's that kind of game. But it's much better, I think, in terms of its presentation, sound, and everything. Give it a go. I know it's Sega CD, so it's hard to sort of play. But if you get a chance, give it a go.
It's the Doki Doki Panic argument all over again, Viraj.
Yes, the Doki Doki Panic with Mario Brothers 2 USA makes it much more accessible for Westerners to play that game. But yeah.
So, and when you find the right Sega CD games, because there's a few that are worth it, with Snatcher, for example, right? So there's some really cool ones on Sega CD. But as an interesting side note, on the Eternal Champion Sega CD, we filled the disc, which almost no games did. We had characters and kills, and we had videos of video kills. We packed it. We had music like up the yin yang. We had everything. And so when you have a developer that really cares about the fact they're working on a Sega CD and they have the ability to, they can make it pretty good. There's a few good ones in there.
Just a compliment I want to say. It shocks me. It shocks me to death that 2 years ago, when Sega of Japan were making the Sega Mega Drive Mini 2 and the Sega Genesis Mini 2, how on the Western release of that system, it didn't load Eternal Champions as a Sega CD game for us. It sickens me. There's no licensing that they needed. It was their own IP. Why they didn't do it? It shocks me how they put some other game on there, like, I don't know, was it Sewer Shark or something instead of Eternal Champions?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it baffles me why Sega went and did what they did. I mean, that has a quality. Yeah, maybe they'll make a Mega Drive Mini 3 in the shape of a Sega Neptune, and we'll have that game and we'll see it, because it deserves a second chance, and people should play that game. It's a quality fighting game for the Sega CD. In fact, it's the best one.
Well, at least Rystar got in.
Well, yeah, but they messed up the sound on that. On Rystar, they messed up the sound. They messed up the sound emulation on Rystar. I have to say that, but. Going back to Eternal Champions and fighting games on the Sega CD, there weren't that many. There was only Eternal Champions. Mortal Kombat got a Sega CD release, but there were issues with that game because when you tried to pull off a fatality or something or do a move, the game would sort of pause for a bit with the sound channel, and it would totally ruin your experience. Whereas Eternal Champions is a fluid game. There are a few other fighting games, but there's a few SNK games. So you saw Samurai Showdown on Sega CD. That was great. And I think there was a Fatal Fury on Sega CD too. So they were really good. But I think Eternal Champions is an exclusive for Sega CD. That they never put it on the Mega Drive Mini 2. But anyway, that's just my rant over with that. I think it's just it was injustice there. And I think, again, that's just Sega of Japan being vindictive and trying to put their Virtua Fighter series on top of Eternal Champions and trying to forget it.
Yeah.
But the first Eternal Champions on the Genesis Mini to begin with. They've recognized the first game in the series, but they should have at least put the second one on the Mini 2. But hey, I don't have the power to make the decision for Sega. If I did, I'd make that Mega Drive Mini 2 10 times better than what it was. But anyway, that's another story.
Well, too, in retrospect, especially for people like you that are much more the historian of that stuff, is that, mistakes are made in a variety of ways, and they're just kind of a lot more obvious. And you say, oh, why did you take out that level? Why did you change this? This is worse than the other version. And sometimes the people in power, either they were given direction that wasn't the best, or they made bad decisions.
Yeah.
Or there's reasons like the Virtual Fighter for the Game Gear wasn't playable for 2-player. You couldn't use the link cable.
Yeah.
And that was because they said, oh, we don't have very many people that use it, so we're not going to bother including it and testing it, right? And so, but I would also say still bad decision, because it wouldn't have cost.
That was a great Game Gear versus fighter game. I love it.
Yeah, it was.
It is a great fighting game, and it's fluid. That's what I like. Because for those of you who don't know, during the handheld era, there are a lot of 8-bit transitions from Mortal Kombat being put on the Game Gear and the Game Boy. There are a lot of them, and they all played pretty poorly. But Virtua Fighter animation on the Game Gear is actually a really good 2D 8-bit fighter. It's actually one of the better ones, and it's a shame that never got the quality control that it deserved, because in terms of 2-player, it never had that 2-player, and it never really had a console port for Master System, which would have been nice as well. But obviously by then it was too late, so that's a shame. But Virtua Fighter Animation is a handheld game, and we never got a release. I think it was in Brazil. It got released in Japan. I think we never got it as a Western release, from my understanding. I don't know, but it's a shame.
I have a small story for that that one. So because you don't have voiceovers, right? When a character wins, they don't get to do their bit. I was tasked with coming up with kind of victory text for the various characters.
Nice.
And so if you notice, for Raj, I'm sure you don't memorize all of them, but they're quite snarky. They're very antagonistic and sarcastic, and that's because what we did was we had played a lot of Tekken, Street Fighter, Eternal Champions at work, and we would say things to each other when we beat each other. And so we basically picked our favorite ones and put them in there. So it's like, where's the challenge? Thanks for coming. It's like just like silly stuff. Now, retrospectively, very selfish, because if I did it now, I'd be literally really true to each character. We kind of were like the ones that said the certain things kind of fit those characters. But if you play the game, when you win the various characters or you're beaten by the certain characters, look at that copy. That's all the Sega QA. That's us talking smack to each other, is what that was.
Worth the money. We got a follow-up question here from Sir Dan. He says, what's the deal with Dimensional Raiders?
Yeah, so that's why you know about it. So here's this. Although for people on our podcast, what I'm showing right now is a full color picture called Dimension Raiders, and there is a flame wizard. There's a kind of bestial sci-fi marine. There's a superhero. There's a vampire hunter. There's a robot. There's a cartoon detective. There's a Conan-looking guy, and there is some 1950s space girl with a jetpack. And this game was one that I pitched back when Sega Soft first came to be, when we were trying to figure out what product to do. And this actually has 12 pages that I don't have the other ones anymore, and by our in-house artist named Ernie Chan, who did a lot of Conan. Filipino, by the way. And unfortunately, he's passed, but he was a wonderful guy and so talented. And he did a lot of great work. And whatever he did, like this Barbarian, if you look at it, for those of you guys that collect comics, that is Conan right there. Like he just can't get away from his Conan. But anyway, the game that I pitched was a real-time strategy, but you were managing a group of characters. And without going too much detail for you guys, I can always add more, is that it was a multiverse kind of thing way before the MCU was doing it, where you would have all these characters from these different dimensions. And I'd mentioned so many weird ones, right? Like you had a wizard, a superhero, all that. And they all end up teaming up for this common goal to keep the threads of the universe from coming apart. And you would go to each person's world. You would fight like a bunch of like vampires and monsters in one world, and then fight like some superheroes and villains in that one. And then you go over and be like in Western times, right? And I mean, I thought it was a pretty good premise, but there's a lot that goes on to getting a green light. And I was too green, using the word green, to really know how to position myself to make that a game that people would want to turn on internally.
Heck, I'd play something like that. And if something like that
That
were
was
to be
fun.
made nowadays, I would,
Well,
It
years later, when I ran, because we're talking about D&D, I used to play another game called Champions, which is a hero system. And I did very much the same thing, but for my friends. I said, okay, each of you guys secretly make your own characters. And I said, hey, we're doing superhero world. Make a superhero. And I said, don't tell your friends. You're going to be a vampire hunter. Don't tell your friends. And so they didn't know that they're all from different worlds. And so when you started playing, it was really cool. So I got to do it in real life. I just didn't get to make a game out of it.
Well, how did that turn out? How did the play session turn out?
It was fantastic. It was because it was literally like they went from like a sci-fi, and then they were transported at the end of that one, and they're suddenly in a horror world, which is a completely different environment. And so it's fun. I got to kind of just pull the best of all these genre tropes and stuff. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, sounds like it will work as an actual video game. What can I say?
Can you show us the picture again? I love the old school painted style, and I think we should go back to that. I really love that.
Yeah, he was so good. And
So nice.
I wish
That's
I
a
had
cool.
I wish I had the other pages, because basically it tells a story. But it was all black and white, so it wasn't as cool as this, except for one big battle scene. But I mean, there's a lot of. I've been fortunate, super fortunate, that most of the games I've worked on have released, and a lot of them have been pretty decent. I know a lot of people in the industry that have worked on games for like.
Oops, we have a little bit of technical difficulties. We'll just wait for Eric to come back for a moment.
I'm back.
There you go. All right, he's back.
Anyway, I don't know what exactly, but I've been fortunate that a lot of the games I've worked on have been either greenlit or completed or decent. I know a lot of people, a lot of friends that have worked on games for as long as like 5 years, and that got canceled. So imagine that, how from a resume and a personal satisfaction standpoint, it's pretty devastating. So it's tricky. And so I've had plenty of pitches. Nowadays, I don't mind. I can just pitches, but I've new. So they don't like it, fine. I got a new one for you. You don't like that one? Here's a new one for you. And so, sometimes they get greenlit, sometimes they don't.
That's the attitude right there. We got the last question coming from Sir Dan, and then we'll proceed with Sir JDM's question. So let's go with Sir Dan's third question right here.
Eric's a Dungeons and Dragons man. Okay, he's he's probably, as you've seen pictured on him round, he's got some rocking armor, got this massive sword. For our promotion flag for the show, he's wearing some wicked, like, beasting armor. You know what I mean? Really, really cool armor. So being a Dungeons and Dragons man, after we did our interview with him, I really got to thinking, what would Erik have done if he'd had the chance in terms of making a D&D style game potentially for the Sega Mega Drive or even Sega Saturn. But on the Sega Mega Drive, you had a few CRPGs like Buck Rogers' Countdown to Doomsday, which I think is a great RPG at the time as well, especially good. So I just wondered what Erik would have liked to have done, or if he would have liked to have done that. He might not have wanted to do anything like that, but would he have liked to have done some D&D Mega Drive stuff? And if he did, what would have been his angle on it? What kind of direction would he really like to go in it? So they're my 3 questions for the main man with us today. Legend as always, Erik. Keep your daft jokes coming. And for everybody else, keep your gaming timeless.
I don't know what he's talking about. I'm not into cosplay or this is,
oh my goodness.
So cool.
Is that a goblin head? Oh
yeah, it's a goblin
Oh my
head.
gosh.
Yeah, and so his name's Snark, and he's really sarcastic, and he's kind of like Deadpool, but in D&D.
Perfect name for a goblin, Snark.
So,
okay, there you go.
Yeah, so I stream on it's called Gen Con TV on Twitch. They're a Twitch arm of the biggest TTRPG convention in the world called Gen Con. And yeah, I love D&D. And to answer the question, though, I mean, I can answer stuff about like cosplay and my history, but I loved and played the hell out of the old gold box games, Pool of Radiance, Secret of the Silver Blades,
Curse of the Azure Bonds. Yeah.
Yep. And loved all those. And I played probably every single D&D game on PC, from Neverwinter Nights to all the stuff in the middle to stuff on console. If I had my druthers. Now, I will say that I was pretty young in the industry, that in the Sega days, I would have definitely needed the help to have the structure to make sure that it was a solid D&D, game, because like I could dungeon master, but then taking all that stuff and transferring it in a way that could be developed in a timely manner and fit the system. Obviously doable. And Raj made the good point of Buck Rogers, because that's the same guys that did those games I mentioned, Polar Radiant stuff, which is SSI, or at least they're the original. I don't know who did the port of it. But yeah, I've always would have loved to. The closest I came to that is probably when I worked at Gazillion on the Marvel Heroes game, which is not Dungeons and Dragons, but it is stories, and it is characters, and it is adventure, and it is story. And so I did a lot of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I love that stuff. What I would have wanted to do is something a lot like the Buck Rogers, or a lot like Pool of Radiance, where hey, let's give them this fun turn-based immersive Dungeons and Dragons experience they can play by themselves, which was what the big thing was back then. Was, hey, I don't need to have 5 people at my house to play it. I can play it on my own, and I also get sound effects and visualizations, and I know that, and also use your strategies because you know the game system, right? Like how Baldur's Gate 3 is great if you play 5e D&D, you understand the rules. But yeah, I would have loved to. The opportunity just never came, yeah, I mean, I was never in a place where I could just say, hey, let's do a D&D game. But yeah, who knows, maybe in the future someday, because I'm in that circle of D&D people. I play with Luke Gygax, who's the son of Gary Gygax. Cool. And I'm actually working on, hey, I got first announcement here. But I'm working on a Dungeons and Dragons adventure module that's gonna be published. And so I'm still in that realm, and I would have loved to have done that for the Genesis, because I think it would have also brought in a lot of gamers into D&D, because I think a lot of D&D people got into games, but not all gamers were D&D people, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of got a little bit popular because of, what was that Netflix show, Stranger Things? And it might get up there. We're gonna have to talk D&D sometime soon, Eric. But before we get into JDM's question, Joe, I just want to pitch a very quick question to Eric on this one. Knockout Kings. If you had the chance to do a spiritual sequel to that one, or a new one in the franchise, I know licensing is a huge thing when it comes to the boxers themselves. The Philippines being a huge boxing
Pacquiao.
craze.
Pacquiao.
Top three characters that you want in your new Knockout Kings game.
Yeah, you'd be surprised that unless you want an exclusive, boxers aren't that expensive because we had a lot in Knockout Kings.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like someone like Muhammad Ali, he was the most expensive, but you get a very, very small royalty. But then you could get some people for as much as like $10,000 for full rights. And
Okay.
But okay, that being said, the ones that I would mention would all be expensive. Okay, so that's a tricky question, right? So I'm going to go from the standpoint of people nowadays, what they would want to see,
Yes.
right? And
Adonis Creed.
so so I did do some work consulting on the Creed boxing game with Servius, but here nor there. I would probably go back and still pick the most iconic ones because boxing nowadays is different. There's some good fighters, but the competition level is different. The consistency of who's on the top is different. I would for sure get Ali and Tyson.
Ali and Tyson, yeah.
But the problem is because now, I should probably pick a heavy, a medium, and a lightweight, right? I mean, that's the only kind of fair thing. So let's go Pacquiao because also he was an exciting fighter. And I met Floyd Mayweather, and he was a jerk. And I'm sure Pacquiao is as cool as he seems, and like he doesn't seem like capable of like being anything other than he presents himself. And he's a really exciting fighter. So probably Pacquiao would be one. And I'm totally pandering to all the Filipino people watching right now. But yeah, and then it's got to be Muhammad. I mean, there's an argument for Tyson because people still talk about him. He was gonna have a fight, but I would probably still take Ali because I think you could do more with him. But we did have Tyson in Knockout Kings because that was when he had a lot of legal issues, a lot of crimes that were being committed, and so we couldn't use him. But Ali and him, and then who'd been? I mean,
We got Foreman.
I love Sugar. What were we saying?
What about George Foreman?
George. Oh, so I mean, when you go to heavyweights, there's like 7 or 8 that are like swap them. You have Frazier, and you have there's so many amazing fighters that could take that. But I would go Ali because also what he stood for. Like he always had this incredible sense of individualism, and he was also entertaining, and he was incredibly talented, and he did a lot of just amazing things. And so I would still go with him. And my personal favorite would probably have to be Sugar Ray Robinson for the middleweights. And a lot of people don't know who the hell he is. So if I did it for the audience, I would probably instead do a poll. Like, do people want Sugar Ray Leonard? Do they want someone even more recent, like what's his? I can't Cogsogny. What's his name? Yeah. So it depends. I don't follow boxing like I used to. I follow boxing a lot until the maybe 2010s or so. And so a lot of the guys I only know them from a few fights.
Yeah.
So Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson, probably not very marketable, but still the best, and then Pacquiao.
All right. Got it.
Not even someone from Ready to Rumble.
Oh well. So I mean, if we're talking ambitious characters, I would lean more towards, even though it's already been done, is the Creed game because they have Ivan Drago and they have Rocky and they have you have Creed himself, the young Creed and the older Creed. I mean that's probably better for a video game, and it's probably why they did.
I
they
agree.
made the game, right?
And that Rocky game was good for PlayStation 2. I liked it. The one by Rage Software. That was actually good for what it was.
Yeah.
Please continue.
All right. Thanks for that one. Let's go to JDM's question then.
Let's go to Sir JDM's question.
Hello, timeless gamers. This is Juan De Marcos of 123 Go Retro, and I heard that you're doing a show with Sir Erik Walhberg, and I heard that he's into Dungeons and Dragons and CRPGs. May I ask, what are your favorite Dungeons and Dragons campaign? And speaking of CRPGs, have you ever tried testing CRPG games? And what are your favorite CRPGs?
Great. Yeah. So, like I said before, Joel, like I can talk a whole 2 hours about D&D, and I'll try and keep the things tight.
We'll set up a new podcast separate for that one.
I'm happy because one thing I'll say too is, and I say this in almost every interview, because I play Dungeons and Dragons, I'm here in front of you guys. It taught me how to problem solve, how to anticipate the actions of players, how to entertain, how to work with what you've got. Like there's all these things that are very much like making games. And if you look at people like the Russo brothers and people make movies, a lot of them play D&D as well. The guys that did Stranger Things play D&D. Okay, so there's that. And I've been playing since I was 10, so it's been 47 years now. And I love D&D. I love the shared experiences. To answer the question that was proposed, like I said, I've worked on MMOs, but neither of them were fully CRPGs. They were action-based RPGs, right? Like the Magic Legends that was canceled, but still, fantasy-based. And then I'd mentioned earlier Marvel Heroes. My favorite games are still what I mentioned earlier. Well, actually, so I could break them down. So you have the gold box games, which for people in the audience is way, way back in the 80s. They had 4 games in a row, and you would take the characters and bring them up each time. So for a period of, I think, maybe 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, you would take these characters from level 1 to level, I think it was 16 or something.
You could import them. You could import them into each subsequent game.
It was amazing. It was like happy. It was and it was so well done. So there's that. And then I loved Neverwinter Nights was fantastic. That came out in the early 2000s. That was really, really good. I like Dragon Age Origins, which is not D&D, so I'll throw that out. And then what's the other one that I really enjoyed? I guess those would be the main. And then I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons online when it first came out. Played it on and off for about 5 years. And then and like I'll say that I still really, really, really love video games, and so it's kind of a 50-50 for me. It's just that this is something I've been able to lean into is because of COVID. I met people and I've been playing online with people. And then I say, hey, let's cosplay. Hey, let's do this TikTok fun channel, which, by the way, is called Dad Jokes and Dragons. Dan is a prince because he always promotes me, but he always says it wrong. It's not Dungeons and Dad Jokes. It's Dad Jokes and Dragons on TikTok. But my daughter and I, by the way, she's the other person's in it, and my oldest daughter. And we also, stream together and stuff. And just D&D is fun, and it's a shared experience. What's my favorite setting, which is question. So the setting that I loved, I really only played a module of, which is now a setting, which was the Ravenloft setting. Which was
Ravenloft.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So playing first edition D&D, which is still my favorite. I play 5, but I love 1. And I had an elf thief acrobat named Landon. And it was me and 3 of my friends and probably like 4 more NPCs because it was a tough adventure to play the original Ravenloft when it came out. So Ravenloft, if people don't know, it's like being in the middle of a Dracula movie. It's extremely moody, and the art that's in it, the writing that's in it, it's terrifying. And for the first time, you're playing D&D and you're afraid, and that was cool. And so when we got to the end, it was just me and my best friend that were left. He had a character that had been aged by ghosts, de-leveled by wraiths. He was a mess. His character was like weak as hell. He was originally our toughest character, but then he was like nothing. And then we met Strahd, the vampire, the Dracula. I was able to use this magic item, and this is what's so weird about D&D, because this is like 40 years ago. I remember I had a lantern that you'd open up. It would be sunlight quality light, and then it would hit the vampire, and any vampires would freeze, stunned in place for that many rounds. Okay. So I opened it and it hit him, and I rolled a 10 out of 10, 1 to 10 rounds. 10 rounds is a turn. When you do a turn, a Dracula turns into mist and they go back to their grave because you've effectively neutralized them. And so then if you can get to their coffin and put a stake in their heart, you can kill them forever. Okay. So my best friend died in that fight. I got Strahd. He was in the coffin. It was just me. Everyone else was dead. And so it's more like, Eric, if you win, I can get the people brought back to life when we win the game, right? So I go in to, we found his crypt. We go in there, I sneak in, I have the stake out. In come the vampire wives, the Dracula wives, right? And there's 3 of them. Roll for initiative. Initiative in D&D, for people who don't know who goes first. My character is very dexterous. I rolled poorly. They rolled better than me. They went first. They killed me right at the precipice of winning the game, and I love it. I still remember that, right? Oh, hi, my mom's online too. Hi, Mom. So, it was
hello, Miss.
It was a great experience. Just remember that many years. So yeah, so that's favorite setting, favorite games, what D&D means to me, all kind of encapsulated.
Wow. Me personally, there's something special to be said for Dragonlance, but that's just me. Yeah.
It's amazing. Dragonlance is absolutely amazing.
I mean, I know you do the little comedy sketch thing with your daughter. Does she actually enjoy doing it, or do you make her dress up?
Yeah, I have blackmail on her. No.
Oh my goodness.
So fortunately, my daughter is very much her own person. She just graduated art school. She teaches at my kickboxing school. She's a very wonderful, self-driven person. But she does enjoy how much she has to do, which is she does all the backgrounds. So all the backgrounds in it are her she created.
Oh.
And then she enjoys the cosplay. She and I, if Raj probably knows from Facebook, we have all the way back when I was Spider-Man and she was a ninja to she's Wonder Woman and I was Thor, like for years, and now we cosplay. So she likes that part. And then because I write them all, it's easy for her. And she's a bit of a chip off the block where my bad humor is kind of rubbed off on her. So she enjoys it. And she's pretty darn good at it. Like Raj has seen them. She just reads them out. Like I know how to deliver it because I wrote it, but she does a great job. And so she enjoys it. And we are doing a lot more with this. That costume you saw up there, that's a new costume we're filming next week, a bunch for next 6 months. And she has this amazing, super glammed up armor, super cool bow, all new stuff, new jokes, still bad, but they're new. And then she and I are creating a children's choose your own adventure book with those characters and her art. So we just had a meeting on that. So you're going to see our characters translated into a kid's choose your own adventure book as well.
I mean, the official branding choose your own adventure with R.A. Montgomery and Edward Packard.
That is not legal to use that term. So
I know. I was going to say.
I think currently the tagline, I'd have to open my email. I believe it called give me 1 second. This still, so also I would probably pitch it to them too. If we finish it, I'll probably find who those people are and say, do you want to publish this? Right?
Hey, why not? Yeah, I mean, I think they're publishing new stuff now. The Choose Your Own Adventure guys.
Yeah, they are. I just bought one recently to kind of see how they're doing it these days.
There you go.
Let me let's see. Okay. Go.
We got
it'll take a second.
quick question here from Sir Jomar.
Yeah.
Have you tried playing in the dungeon in Wisconsin?
Oh, good question.
I've actually played in it. So there's a convention called GaryCon that they have every. My mom pumping up her granddaughter, and she's right. She is
very, very good.
So every year in Wisconsin, there's a convention called GaryCon, and so I go there. That's my destination. It's smaller than Gen Con, but more intimate, and I've been able to meet DB Weiss, who was one of the showrunners for Game of Thrones, The Big Show, Joe Manganiello. They all play D&D. They go there. I couldn't say I'm friends with any of those guys, but I've met them. But then I play with the other celebrity people I know, and so being there last year, they had an opportunity to play. I forget what they call it. They had a name for the event, but I played Old Chainmail in the basement where they used to play D&D.
Chainmail. Okay.
Yeah, chainmail, which is the precursor to.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never tried it though.
It was first time playing as well, and I had a blast. It was really fun, and then I also got to walk up and see the actual house they lived in. It's small, and the reason they rented the place. They never owned it, and so what happened was years later when they wanted to have D&D events, they had to go to the current owner and say, "Hey, do you want to rent this space out? Because we have a lot of people that want to play here." Because it wasn't like their old home; it was their old rental. Right before they became rich and got a mansion, basically.
Oh yeah.
So the answer is yes. I played in the dungeon.
Okay. It seems like Jomar was there last year too. You guys might have passed each other, never even.
Wow!
Yeah.
Wow! Amazing. Yeah. Have luck me up next time.
Funniest thing. Well, do we still have questions, Joe, or shall we just?
I believe Sir Viraj has an aching question that he would like to ask. Sir Eric. Yeah, I mean. I don't think you have asked your official question yet.
What was my official question? I forgot. What was it?
Something about the Dark Wizard.
Nah, we know the answer to that question anyway. It's not necessary.
All right. Well, then we just hit the 2-hour mark. Let me just pitch my. It's a very, very not so much a question as it is. Currently, we know that you work. We know that you work with Zynga. Of course, we cannot discuss anything behind the curtain, but it's more like my question is more like, how do you feel working in the company that was one of the pioneers of how mobile games are nowadays? The guys Zynga being Words with Friends and Farmville. How does it feel being in that environment right now, as compared to how it was back when you were with Sega, back when you were with EA? Is the atmosphere majorly different here as it was before?
The atmosphere currently is a lot like the second time I worked at EA. I worked in a division called Pogo that did casual games. They're still around. Because you had a combination of, you have a big company that in general back then for many years were doing pretty well. And so you had a regular income. In our division in particular, being casual games at EA was pretty predictable. And so no one was stressed. And because they're not AAA, this is my future kind of game products, people had pride in the games, but there wasn't a lot of infighting about the games. Whereas I've worked in internal teams where there's a lot of fighting because people wanted to know my vision, know my feature, right? And so it was a good work-life balance. It's very pleasant. And then also you have a lot of good infrastructure, a lot of good processes. And so you know how to make these things happen and not like always like fumbling things and trying to figure things out. And Zynga is many ways like that because they have so many mobile games that are successful that they're able to quarter.
Sorry,
and
a little bit of technical difficulty. Sorry.
I'm back.
Repeat a little bit, Eric. Go ahead.
There you go.
I think Zynga's trying to censor me. So
could be.
Anyway, so because it's a very similar environment at Zynga where the games that we have that are live are all doing pretty well and very consistent, that you have, again, a lot of people that take pride in what they do, but they're not fighting over it. They're not stressing out. We have a lot of processes and a lot of roles, like a lot of smaller companies like Sega. We didn't even have designers at Sega at all. We had producers who designed, which is what I did. And so we have designers, we have producers, we have product managers, we have project managers, we have, technical art directors, we have art directors, we have everything. And that allows you to focus on your work and also, fall in line with the development and publishing process. So it's a really good place to be now as someone who, in addition to my older daughter, Erica, I have a 2-year-old Sylvie and a 5-year-old Noelle. And that I really want to have a job these days that is good work-life balance, and that fits that.
All right, excellent. Thanks for that one, Eric. And I think, generally that is everything that we've got. Joe, you want to take it on?
I got a couple. I suddenly thought of a couple of questions, but I'm not sure if we still have the time. Like, for example, since we are in a safe space now, if Sir Eric can voice out his grievances, what would he say to Hayao Nakayama, insisting on the Sega 32X, Sega CD, and the Saturn? Another question would be, working with EA for quite some time, are they really the evil corporation that people say they are?
Well, obviously, yes. That's a foregone conclusion. We know they are.
Loaded question.
I'm not sure if we have the time anymore.
We can save that for next time.
Well,
My personal question,
you're going
my
to
personal
hell,
question
all
would
right?
have been. My
But we
personal
can
question
spare
would
at
have been,
least 15 more minutes.
Have you met Trip Hawkins personally?
No, but I can say that I met Tom Kalinske personally.
Oh, there you go.
And I worked with him at Gazillion. He was on the board of directors for Gazillion, and his office was like 10 feet from me, and I got to talk to him way more than I ever had at Sega. And he's the sweetest guy ever. He's obviously an icon.
Hey,
so no, but Trip is on the board of
for an interview. Anyway, go ahead.
Hook us up, please. Hook us up.
But Trip was also on the board of directors of an investment company that invested in the last company I was at. I never met him, but my CEO would have lunch with them. So, kind of 7 degrees of separation.
Of course, yeah.
And yeah, obviously that guy, Mr. EA. I can answer those questions really quick for Joe.
Sure.
So,
Yes.
I don't have grievances. I kind of mentioned that I think that people were doing what they thought were the best decisions at the time for Sega CD 32X and all that. I think mistakes were made in that they said, hey, EA is super important. What do we need to do to get them on board and make Saturn, sports games? What do we need to do to get quality third-party developers to make games for us? How can we make sure that when we say the 32X is good, here's why, that we make games that actually show it that it's better? But again, I think that at the end of the day, I really do think that it was an uphill battle for Sega, and that Microsoft and Sony were going to win, and Nintendo is such a niche that they're going to continue. So I think the end result might have been about the same. And then for EA, I was very fortunate that I was there before any microtransactions ever existed.
Oh yeah.
So
Right.
that's really where the evil comes in, so to speak, right? I mean, Knockout Kings was a disc. Here's your disc. Play the game. No updates.
Yeah.
And then the casual games were the same. It was actually a free site, and you would pay for avatars and other things. And so I would say with EA, it's divisional. Depends on what division you're in too.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, but Viraj spoke to it too. I think that the kind of the public opinion is what it is, and there's probably not, it's not super inaccurate.
There's a lot that happened in that era, and there's a lot of decisions Sega did make. In fact, I'd say it's a horrible comedy of errors, and we can retrospectively look back and why did they did that. But then you can understand why they did that when you look at Sega CD. Yeah, they had to make it because the future of video games was on disc, and Sega knew they had to program on disc. I think that was the right decision. With 32X and Saturn and the direction they went with that, that was a big error, and they should have just stuck with one of those platforms. Because if you look at it, it was crazy. Sega were overstretched. They're making games for Master System in Europe. They're making games for Game Gear. That's the 8-bit handheld. They're making games for their Mega Drive Genesis platform. That's 3 already. And then we're making Sega CD game. That's our premium 16-bit, alternative. And now they want us to make games for 32X and Saturn. That's 6 platforms. I mean, what do you think I'm made of money? So I mean, there's a number of issues there. But then you understand the decisions why they went in that direction. Hayao Nakayama ordered Tom Kalinske to make the 32X. Yeah, because he wanted to have a solid state medium for 32-bit technology. But then at the same time, he never told him about a Saturn. And when he did tell him, look, we've got the 32-bit successor in the bag, it was too late. You launch a 32X November 1994, and then the Saturn comes up at the same time. And then people find out there's a true 32-bit successor in America. And this is meant to be a stopgap for what? This? I mean, Sega, what's going on? Make a decision. So there's even more to it than that. There's so much I could rant about as to the decisions that they made. But if I was to, I'd pull all my hair out. I'll be as bald as Dan. But I mean, it does what would happen and what they did. But I think, look, all I will say is thank you for doing your part in paving the way for a young boy like me testing the games that I grew up with on the platform that I love. So I thank you for it from the bottom of my heart, because those video games shaped me at the earlier stages to be the man that I am. All the games that you tested, I had Aladdin on Genesis, Rice I played, and so on and so forth. Virtua Fighter on 32X, I think you had a dabble in that. But you I think there was a comment in the section here that I think JDM put earlier about how it was a time of mass, we're innovating. Sega were innovators. Let's not forget. You can say there were mistakes, but they innovated hardware like anything. They were pushing the frontiers of gaming. And I say they had 6 platforms. That was nuts, but nobody's ever done that before. It was a first for it. And they were really pushing for hardware to be the best that it could be because they believed in having great hardware to push the software to be as good as it could be. So, I thank you for being part of that journey that I went on and all of us youngsters who grew up with the Sega hardware. They also pushed Nintendo to compete with Sega to put their stuff out as great as they could, along with Sony and all the others. And you were definitely one of the pioneers, even though nobody talks so much about Sega anymore. It was amazing what they were doing. And I think everyone goes, what's Sega's legacy? What have they got? They don't even exist really anymore. Sega CSK that we knew don't exist. It's Sega Sammy. Sega's legacy, you're looking at it with me. I am Sega's legacy. I'll always remember those things. So, again, thanks again.
Yeah, no,
very, very eloquent.
We are.
Go ahead, Eric. You respond to that.
If we are giving thanks here, okay, I would also like to give my thanks and appreciation to Sir Eric because I played Eternal Champion, the Mega Drive version, and the CD version, and for making the man that I am now. Thank you for making the girls look bouncy.
Oh, my.
I'm not sure who's responsible for that, but thank you.
Thanks for getting me canceled.
Yeah, trust you to come out with some degeneracy. All right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. John is our resident
making
degenerate.
the man that I am now.
So I will say this. One thing that's great that was brought up earlier about what I think about retro gaming being big again. Back in the day, you have no way really to connect all those people that played those games. And granted, I'd be hanging out with a lot of like 10-year-olds, which probably is not appropriate. But to have people be able to say, hey, this is what your games meant to me. And I play these games, played with my friends, and this is my experience. I have, as I mentioned, I have a fitness kickboxing business, and I have my TikTok, and I have my game career, and now some of the D&D stuff. All the things that I'm doing, all 4 of those things are to enhance and improve and make people happy. And so whenever I get that feedback, I'm like, good. It's like time well spent, right?
Because Sir Eric did enhance that, and it did make me enjoy it.
Yeah, and to Faraj's point, right? Like, I'm a person in the industry, and if you're like a big fan of Eternal Champions or Knockout Kings, maybe I can say, oh, great, I affected you. But to be a part of that movement, a part of that genre that can build nostalgia and create these great moments and memories and inspirations, that's huge for me. So thanks back, guys.
But one thing I will say, is on the Genesis there was this game. It's called Expert. That absolutely sucked. I mean, you should the credits.
So I can talk to you about that.
Terrible.
So that game was a combination of marketing saying, hey, our Eternal Champions is popular. We need those characters in a game. And then also Donkey Kong Country being out and being like, oh, it's Silicon Graphics, let's do this cool art, right? And we had the wrong development house to do it. And then the design, I don't even know where the design came from, to be honest. But I basically was given it. I think Tony Van, who's a good friend of mine, was the original producer, and then he left. And so I basically took it and shipped the pig. I shipped that pig. It was...
You tried to put lipstick on a pig. That's what it is.
It was unfortunate. Yeah, it was very unfortunate.
I also want to say something to Eric. I appreciate the fact that you're still active in the industry right now, even after all these years. And it's really wholesome to see when a parent and their kids are like bonding in the same hobby. Our mom always says that us siblings are like, you'll get over gaming one day. And fast forward many years, I have a shelf. We're still playing, and it was never a phase for us. And I thank you for being part of the pioneers here in the community. I do understand that it was difficult back then due to the restrictions, the technological restraints, and I'm really honored to have a chance to speak with you today, even though I'm not of the same era as the rest of our panels here. I think that there are still a lot of things that we can learn, especially from the pioneers, because without you guys, I don't think that the gaming industry of today would exist as it is right now. So again, thank you,
Indeed.
and I hope to speak with you in the future.
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
so
well.
glad to have met all you guys. And again, for my part, you're extremely welcome. And for the reasons I mentioned earlier, it's I have the same conversations with D&D people when I meet them. I'm like, oh, thank you for this game, this experience, and I can't believe the guy that made it. So I get it. And I'm just glad that we've all found this thing together. Because I played them too, right? Like I'm also a part of that like nostalgia. I feel it myself. It's so cool that we all have this shared joy and this shared hobby that looks like it's not going to go anywhere for a while.
All
All
right.
right. That being said, I think we can wrap up, Joe.
That's it, guys, and that's the show. But before we head close, let's hear from our sponsors, Streamyard and BitMap.
Do you like playing video games? Do you like reading about history? Do you like learning about video game history? Then you should give yourself the gift of owning some video game history books from BitMap. Since 2014, BitMap Books have published numerous colorful and well-detailed hardbound books about video games ranging from the different video game consoles of old and the various video game genres that will surely pique the interest of its core fanbase. BitMap's team of global video game journalists, players, and illustrators have produced numerous award-winning titles that celebrate the software, hardware, and developers that laid down the foundations for the billion-dollar video game industry we all know and love today. International shipping is also available with careful and considerate packaging from BitMap Books. If you don't want to take my word for it, then you can believe the people, almost 10,000 satisfied customers who submitted their glowing written reviews and video reviews after receiving their books from BitMap. By ordering your first BitMap book using our link, you will also be supporting the Timeless Gamers Show in spreading our love of video games and their rich history. Start your own online live streams, webinars, podcasts, online classes, and virtual presentations with Streamyard. By using Streamyard's user-friendly interface, you can also do simultaneous multi-streaming if you have accounts to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and other platforms. If live streaming is not your style, video and audio recordings are also available, especially with those who have variable and inconsistent internet connections. The finished output will still come out as clear and well articulated exactly as you originally intended. You can also customize the appearance of your presentation like green screen effects, facial touch-ups to smoothen out those facial blemishes, multiple cameras for multiple guests joining in the discussion, your own wallpaper on the background, adding your own logo as a watermark, sharing videos from your own computer or other website for added visual aids with or without audio, uploading your own background music if you wish to set the mood when talking, and lots more. Before you can enjoy all of the wonderful full features of StreamYard, you can start with a 14-day free trial by using our link. Not only that you are supporting the Timeless Gamer Show, but you can see it for yourself how easy it is using StreamYard.
All right, and that's from StreamYard and BitMap. So we'll head to our shameless plugs before we before we close the show. Let's go to Sir Viraj first. Sir Viraj, where can they find you?
Well, as usual, you can find me in hell. That's where I usually reside. But going on a serious note, you can find me on the Sega Mega Masters channel on YouTube. We're taking a bit of a long break now because Dan's recovering from something. But you can find various videos of me and the boys talking about various Sega Mega Drive / Genesis games that we loved and we review. You can also find me on the Sega Genesis group on Facebook and various other gaming groups in the community. Also, you can find me on Twitter as well. You can just search me at Bygone Games UK, and that's my Twitter page I've set up for my resell retro video games, predominantly handheld Nintendo. And I'll be at the Bracknell Gaming Market tomorrow in the UK. For those of you in the UK watching this, which I doubt anyone is from the UK watching this, but anyway, that's where you can find me. Back to you, Sir Joe.
Thank you for that, Sir Viraj. And how about Miss Hinu? You got a couple of fans down there at the chat.
Oh yeah.
Huh?
Miss Hina has tons of fans. She just, doesn't acknowledge them,
I come from so many niches that maybe a lot of people know me because of that. Yeah, so you guys can find me on Facebook, IG, Twitter, YouTube. Everything is all under Hinotora. I normally post game reviews of the stuff that I finished, and not only game reviews, also book reviews. And I also post some of my gaming hauls and some of OOTD. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do check those channels out. Back to you guys.
Quick shout out to Blue Chi 815 and David Weidlich from California. They say hi to Miss Hinu. And how about Sir Joel? Where can they find you?
All right, you can definitely find me at my twitch.tv channel, Banyagang Native, also on kick.com, #FUFB. And generally, I am here always at the Timeless Gamers Show. We do our show for not just for entertainment, but also for education. We try to engage everybody. We love our audience, both the online and the offline audience. So I hope to see you guys again very soon.
All right, thank you for that, Sir Joel. And of course, the man of the night, Sir Erik Walhberg. Where can they find you, sir? And your closing remarks.
I'm going to be really sad when people don't call me sir when I walk out of this room. But yeah, thanks. I was an absolute blast today. I've done a lot of interviews, and this is one of my favorites. It was a lot of fun. So you can find me on Facebook, Erik Walhberg, last name Wahlberg, like Mark Wahlberg, no relation. If you're not a weirdo, I'll absolutely add you on Facebook. And then my daughter and I have as I mentioned, that TikTok. If you like puns, if you like cosplay, if you like fantasy, it's the blend of all three. It's Dad Jokes and Dragons on TikTok. We do have Instagram and Facebook, but really all the action on TikTok. I'm on twitch.tv /GenCon TV every Monday. A show called Just a Quest, 6 p.m. Pacific time. We do cosplay D&D. And yeah, that's very important, super important. I would have kicked myself. So in November 1st to 3rd, I will be in Columbus, Ohio for the Torgi event, which you guys may know, the expo in the U.S., which is a big retro gaming convention. I will be a speaker there. And so if you guys, anyone who's listening, can make it to or want to, check out Torg Events, TORG events.com, and come check it out. I'll be the only guy in the industry panel, development panel. So you can pick my brain, and I'll be there all weekend.
Cool.
All right, we'll make sure to post the links on our Facebook page as well, and on all our links, right, Joe? Joe, you there? Okay.
Yep.
Oh, I think Joe might have experienced a little bit of a glitch, but yeah, I think we're good. Joe.
We lost the audio.
Yeah, it's the perils of going live. Okay. Anyway, that's our show, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for hanging around. And yeah, our bodies and minds may grow out of date, but our gaming will always remain timeless. We'll see you guys again next time. Okay, bye. Thanks very much, Erik, for being here. See you guys again soon. All right, let's do this. Oh my goodness, I don't even know how to do this. Joe, go ahead. I think Joe is experiencing a little bit of a little bit of a glitch, but I'll see what I can do on my side. But there you go.
All right, we're done. That's good.